So we work pretty hard on figuring out what plants we have in the district and what it means. A lot of decisions to make around that. The mission of the Florida Park Service is to provide resource-based recreation while preserving, interpreting, and restoring natural and cultural resources. And I was going to paraphrase that or rephrase that just slightly. To look at interpreting first before we figure out what we're preserving or restoring. A lot of questions. So how do we know? How do we know what we have? What species are present? How are they grouped? What else should be there? What does not belong? How are they doing? What do they need to persist and thrive? Do we want them to persist and thrive? So as we're making all these choices, we then have to sort out, okay, now that we know that, what do we do? What are the management actions? What data is needed so that we can implement our choices about what we want and evaluate our success? Well, we have an incredible rich diversity here in this district. It goes all the way from Sumter County and Hernando County south to Collier County. We go east a little bit into the Highlands Ridge, where we have Highlands Hammock State Park, Lake June and Winter State Park. We have over 240,000 acres in this district, and we have some plants and plant communities that are found only in Florida. We were having a little bit of a giggle because we say they're only found in Florida, but it isn't until you say nowhere else in the world do people really get what we mean when we say they're only found in Florida. But it's true, we do have that. On the other hand, we also have several major ports. We have a constant influx in human population that together drive up the presence of some seriously oppressive, invasive plant species. So we really do have to tease out what the individuals are that we have and how they group together. Some examples. This is really dark. If you are from out of state, you're from somewhere else, you come to Florida, you see this, it looks dead, right? But no, there are over a dozen listed endemic species here. These are state endangered, federally endangered plants such as the papery nailwort, or Paronychia tortacea, woody wireweed, Polygonella myriophylla, which is gorgeous plant, as well as the liatris, the scrub liatris here. Or they can be not quite so glorious little plants, such as this sedge, the long bristle sedge, the Rhynchospora megaplumosa, that is only found in 2 counties in Florida, and fortunately we have some of that in one of our parks. Also, as Julie talked about, the scrub itself is a rare and endemic community type. I think of these as legacies. These are Florida's legacy. This, to me, is a legacy community that, as a Florida state park person, I would want to protect. So we've been looking at some dry areas, but we have some incredibly beautiful wet areas, too. Again, though, if you're coming from out of state, you see this, oh, God, annoying, nothing but vines and mosquitoes, right? But to me, I see rare orchids, rare bromeliads, and we also see a whole water system being protected and filtered and possibly sequestering more carbon than we thought possible. Again, you have to know the individuals and how they show up in these groups. We also have to think, okay, so they're showing up, we're getting some sense of what kind of community types we have, but again, this is dynamic. This changes. We can go and we can see, okay, these plants are here, they're in this particular group, so this is the community type we have. But we have this other plant, so maybe it really used to be this other thing and it's changed over time. So a lot of what we have to do at the Park Service is figure out what we have, what maybe was there, but we also have to think in terms of desired future conditions. There's an abbreviation. DFC is what we use a lot when we're looking at communities. Well, this is what we have, is this what we want? In this case, we've got a scrub and a wetland that seemed opposite, but in fact, having well-functioning systems just like this are essential not only for protecting our legacy systems, but they're actually essential for protecting the water that we need for our own species to survive. Okay, so we survey and identify individual plants. Survey serves for inventory, park records, keeping some idea of different types of characteristics that you're going to see in a plant over a year. For instance, grasses can look very different in the spring than in the fall. We begin to get a sense of the status of how our plants are doing when we do these surveying. We can track before and after restoration efforts. The surveys can be informal, they can be formal. We also pull from other people's lists. We work with Florida Natural Areas Inventory, such citizen science groups as EDMAPS or even IMAP invasives. The Florida Atlas gives us a really good sense of what might be in the counties where our parks are. But for the surveys to be of any use, of course, you need to be sure that your identification in your data is good, and you also need to maintain that data then so that you can track and share it. So we use a dichotomous key. Usually we use the Wonderland and Hansen book for Florida, but we use a lot of other resources as well. I love this picture. This is Oscar Shearer to a T to me, but State Park. We usually collect the species that we can identify in the field. We might need a microscope to see certain characteristics, or there's a certain reference back at the lab that we don't have with us. We also collect specimens to serve as vouchers, evidence that the plant was in fact present. At our district, not all districts do this, we do maintain an herbarium. My page won't turn. So we bring in the specimen. I consider this part of our inventory and part of interpreting what we have. It's also part of preserving. Specimens provide evidence. We can get agreement on an identification. We can maintain reference on the types of locations where this plant can be found. We can maintain bloom and phenology data this way. We have potential for DNA material if somebody knows how to do that. And this is actually a time we've had a couple other presentations where getting down to the scientific perfection was not a desired element, but in this case it absolutely is. It is time consuming. You have to collect the plants, you have to press them, you have to make sure that you've labeled everything correctly. You have to go through your identification process, which sometimes can be pretty lengthy. Those things can be tricky sometimes. Freezing, going through the mounting process. But then we have this specimen that is this long-term evidence. It also provides an incredible hands-on learning and verification tool for us in the field. If you know you're going to go to a park and you want to do some surveying or inventorying, or you want to double-check on a plant, you've got something in hand that you can look at that confirms your identification. You can look at that trichome, which is botany speak for a hair. You can look at the little tubercles on a seed right there, and then you can get a sense of what is meant in the key by that particular style or type. So individual species together define a community type. Again, we're going into action steps based on what we think is happening in that community. This is a picture from Highlands Hammock State Park, which is actually part of the Peace River watershed. I was looking at Charley Bowlegs Creek, which flows northwest and then ends up in the Peace River. These are all primarily native plants, and they're actually following a somewhat normal successional pattern in a wet flatwoods area. Normal if you're suppressing the natural fire occurrence that should be happening in that area. This is cutthroat grass being overtaken by native shrubby hollies, lyonias. The shrubs will monopolize. They will decrease the plant diversity in this area. They're going to outcompete the cutthroat and the other species of concern that often are found with cutthroat. Might have to make some management decisions here. Here's another example. This could look like a nice park area, right? Here we got some field, forest, except the problem here is all of these trees, or most of them, are camphor. The vines are lygodium and skunk vine, which if any of you know, all three of those are horribly invasive plants, so if I'm making assumptions, I'm sorry. The grass, very pretty, Kogan grass. So I see a nightmare monopoly of invasive exotic plants. So what do we do as the Park Service? Do we even have a chance at the real Florida in a situation like this? This is many acres of this. Or should we just turn it into a golf course? Other decisions to be made. Here's Gasparilla Island. Some nice grasses, seagrasses, sea oats. We're at the beach, though. Again, we're coming from out of state. Oh, let's put the blanket behind these grasses here. It'll get us a little bit out of the wind. Plants don't matter, right? Plants don't matter. So we lose a little shoreline protection, or we disturb a few shorebird nests. These are all the things that have to go into consideration. We identify the species, but then we kind of have to figure out what it is we want to do. We had a great discussion about what endemics are from Julia. Native, schmative, I've had interesting conversations with people who feel that exotics provide more diversity and therefore should be kept. There's the question of the succession. Okay, we figured out what a community type is, and we're standing here. Is this the succession stage we want to keep? Do we want to bring it back to an earlier succession stage? Scrub is a fairly early successional stage in this whole dynamic process in Florida. But it's been this stage that's been maintained at this early for thousands of years, millions, I don't know. So all of these plants have grown up with this, keep cutting back to this early successional stage. Which desired future condition do we want? Well, I think that I can say that overall, what we want now, currently, with the Florida Park Service, is to preserve and restore the legacies specific to Florida ecosystems, those most probably in existence before the human tampering that became exponential in the last 200-300 years. So given that we've kind of making that decision about what we want, I know that historically the Florida Park Services didn't necessarily start out that way. They they flaunted their exotic species sometimes. But now we've decided we want to protect and expand the ranges of the imperiled species, our legacy community types, and we also want to prevent and minimize the ranges of invasive species. So now we have some idea what we want, but we have all this area to cover, 240,000 acres, 35 parks, only so many biologists, managers, staff. How do we prioritize getting this done? We want to take care of our imperiled species, our invasive species. We want to do some community restoration work. All of these things are plant-based activities. So we've interpreted, we have some sense of what we have, deciding to preserve. I was just going to look here quickly at a couple of the other things that we do based on these decisions. We do want to take care of our imperiled plant species. We use existing reports of plants, records. We implement post-burn surveys. We might use, we definitely use some predictive tools, similar species types or soils. For instance, this is bottomland forest where we've got the needle palm growing, where we have also found this lovely little orchid. It's about this tall, the Triflora amazonicum. But by knowing that this is the kind of habitat that it likes, we know to go and look there. This is one of the ones we are monitoring. We have over 150 imperiled plant taxa in our district. And I say imperiled, I use the the state-listed species, whether they're endangered or threatened. We use the federally listed species. We also follow the Florida Natural Areas Inventory tracking lists. And there are a few other species that we've put on there, such as the Sarracenia minor, the little pitcher plant, just because we've got the southernmost tip of its range in one of our parks. So we do track that just because it's an unusual plant species. Monitoring can be passive or active for these species. Passive monitoring was we kind of know where we expect to see the plants, or a park volunteer sends us a picture of sightings. We track that. We make sure that gets put on the park's plant list. We check for presence while we're doing some other things, maybe checking an archaeological site. But we don't follow a defined methodology. And this is kind of a cross between a passive and a active monitoring. If you can read that, let me know. You can come and help interpret it for me. Active monitoring is done on known sites. We're currently actively monitoring about 30 of our species, where we are getting back at regular intervals and counting individual occurrences. We're taking points, making polygons for where we've looked for each new monitoring period. Each time we go out, the search range is usually expanded a little bit. Some of the challenges for getting this done is getting the people and the hours to do the work. Sometimes accessibility is a serious problem, especially in fire-suppressed areas. Seasonal working conditions, invasive animals can sometimes be a problem. Another challenge is making sure that your parameters for your monitoring are actually repeatable. Counting pitcher plants. Some of the people who had been counting the pitcher plants before my first experience with it didn't explain what they meant by a pitcher plant. And I tried to find pictures of root systems. I tried to find some idea of what constituted a plant. And finally, to make my counts repeatable, I explained that for every 4 active pipes that I found on a pitcher plant, I counted that as a plant. And so next time someone goes out and they want to compare their numbers to mine, they at least have something to compare it to. But we try to follow a very clear, repeatable protocol. We also work a lot with other agencies. We have partnerships with Bok Tower. For instance, this is the Campanula robinsiae. Bok Tower has helped us do the monitoring at Hillsborough River State Park for this plant, and they've also done a lot of the background data, gathering hydrology information and things like that, which has been really helpful for us. I'm just throwing this up as an example chart for some of the data that comes out from doing active monitoring. These are some of the scrub species at Highlands Hammock State Park. These are organized by management zones, and I thought there were a few things that were highlighted in this chart. For instance, the Asclepias curtisii, which is the scrub. Okay, I'm terrible at common names. Milkweed, thank you. This was not the best time to survey for this. NS is not seen. Well, it wasn't in bloom in October when we were out there, so of course we weren't going to see it. We expanded our area. These are 2 management zones that we added in 2012. And so at that point we decided, since it was not as organized in those management zones, that we would just note presence and make sure we did take points, but to make sure that in the following year then those points would then become part of the new count. The red numbers here are 2 new species that we found in our area that were very exciting to find: the scrub bluestem, the schizacrium, and the stylisma. Those are exciting. The garbaria, we had been counting stems, but by 2012, FDEP had decided that they were no longer going to track the garbaria, so we just noted presence. Active monitoring also requires GPS-intensive work. These are polygons for the beautiful pawpaw, the Deringothamus, that I think has had a couple name changes since the survey map was put together. But in this instance, we have we can look at how many acres someone actually looked at, the count of plants that they found within those areas, and you can see where they've been. You can go back, you can repeat that area. These are points that were taken at Big Mount Key for multiple species, including the rare cactus, the Herbaria aboriginum, and the Jacquinia here. This is an interesting, a lot of this data for finding these sites actually came from Florida Master Site File records. So these are old historical and cultural records that guided the search for these plants and initiated the active monitoring for the things that are here. So in the process of doing these monitorings, and we're out there with the GPS and we're counting plants, we're also tracking the condition of the habitat that the plants are found in. And by doing this then, in our reports, when we write up what we find, we also write up what the next action steps are so that the park managers know what comes next, what they need to do to help protect this species. For instance, again, with the Sarracenia minor, we've got fire suppression is a threat here. This is being overtaken, hard to find. There's still some cutthroat grass, but for the most part it was getting buried by the shrubby. This was a fire that was done in response to a monitoring on the Bonamia grandiflora, scrub morning glory in South Fork State Park. Looks pretty dead, doesn't it? Well, this is within a year later. This is the Bonamia, and I don't know if you can see, there's just incredible numbers of runners going through here. The numbers went from like almost 200 stems in 2009 to almost 600 stems the following year. The bloom numbers went up. It was just a wonderful success story. Other threats are invasive animals as well. This was a point where there were 15 or 16 rare plants, and I walked a good 30, 40 foot perimeter around this area and could find none. The hogs had completely damaged this area. Other invasives could be not necessarily on as grand a scale. We worked with the ridge rangers at Highlands Hammock State Park, where we've got the rare wedge-leaf eryngium being encroached on by the natal grass. And you can't go out there and spray, and you can't, so they went out and they worked a good quarter-acre place, pulling the grass carefully from around this rare plant, plant by plant. We also then would assess the management with tagging areas. If they need contractors to come in to do, for instance, invasives work, we can tag where they need to be careful of the rare plants that are in there. I just wanted, this is a side comment, but you know, we do these management efforts for the imperiled plants, for the community type, and even though my specialty may be plants, Myakka River State Park, by doing all of these things that it's been doing to preserve these legacy community types and preserve their plants there, they just caught pictures of 2 burrowing owls coming back to the park. So it's not just the plants that we help when we do this. Part of management, also managing imperiled species, also means supporting range expansion for some of these species. Juliet commented on Paynes Creek Historic State Park as being an introduction site for the Chrysopsis floridana. So we worked with park staff to, using soil types and other parameters, come up with some suggested areas for planting. People came out, did the planting based on all of Bach's good work to get them surviving to that point. They're very happy there. They're doing so well. We've even got a few recruits showing up in the parking lot. So another success story. So back to that mission statement, interpreting, preserving, restoring natural resources. I mentioned this desired future condition. You have to know what you want in order to know what to do to restore it, or what you're restoring towards, or to measure how well you're doing. Again, we have to manage fire for that. But there's also active planting that the park has to do. And they have to know which plants to put where. And here's a, as far as the eye can see, a sea oats planting on Lover's Key in an attempt to do some restoration. We could also include correcting hydrology, but we definitely have to control invasive species. And again, when you're working with invasive species, you have to have the correct identification. You have to know which plants you're dealing with. You have to maintain some kind of inventory of where they are. You have to decide what you're going to treat as if it's invasive or just weedy within your park and your circumstances. We basically work from the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council's Category 1 and Category 2 lists, but we're also looking at early detection. Someone in the park says, you know, there's this plant here that we seem to be getting more and more of it. Do you know what this is? Is this an invasive or an exotic? So we look at it. Well, it's not on the FDEP list yet, but it is exotic. We put out an email or something through the FDEP listserv. Has anybody else seen this in their park? And if we're hearing that people are starting to have problems with it, we might decide to start pulling it, or we might decide to start treating it, or not. The IFAS now is actually staffing someone to do the weed risk assessments, the WRA here. So we now have another resource for finding out what may become invasive. Pemberton and Liu did a study, it was either 2010, 2011, on time to market, where they found that an exotic plant sold in Florida for 17 years, the chances were about 70% that that plant was going to become exotic, and invasive in Florida. So we might be in year 9 of this plant, and it might not show up on the FDEP list for another 8 years. So the fact that we now have someone actively working on doing an assessment on whether or not a plant will become an invasive in Florida is fabulous. We're also working with our SISMAs, who are developing early detection lists so that we can do rapid response. Am I up? Oh. Again, have to survey, have to set annual goals, implement treatment. We do have a monthly work day where we do cross-park staff come from different parks to work on one park in particular to eradicate invasives. But this has been a great way for park staff to learn other invasives, to get hands-on experience with other treatment techniques and tools, to have discussions with each other about things that haven't worked. They may have seen pictures of the plant, but to actually be there working with it, they get a much better sense that, oh, you know what, I think I was treating the wrong thing, or I think I'm starting to see this in my park, or it's just been a great experience. And we've also started putting our work days on the SISMA calendars, and I know Southwest Florida SISMA came in and helped us with our work day at Collier Seminole State Park. That was pretty fantastic. And again, sharing experience, working with others. This is Ken Hibbert at Highlands Hammock State Park, where they introduced the air potato beetle. As you can see, if you look at his hand there, you're looking right through the potato leaf at his hand. So they're doing, the beetles and the larvae are happy and healthy and doing a great job, and hopefully they're going to knock it back. So basically, that covers it. We interpret, we preserve, we restore our natural resources. In this case, this was about plants, looking at what we have, surveying, identifying, verifying, interpreting what we have, trying to categorize them into communities, defining whether they're a legacy or whether they're a threat, how we're going to do the work of preserving and protecting, how we're going to do the work of restoring, again, removing threats, but also assisting natural processes. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I think I'm a wannabe botanist at heart. But I wonder, we always talk about the invasives that are coming into our plant communities, and we think of them as things we can see, like other plants. But what about things we can't see? I manage a small preserve on Marco Island where I have a lot of gumbo limbos. And I've had some kind of disease come in, though, like a witch's broom disease. We've been testing for it. It might be a phytoplasma, might be a mycoplasma. It might be something that used as a vector, the spiraling whitefly, which is something new in our area too. So we're getting new things that we can't see. And I wonder if anyone else is having these kind of problems, because it's not only the rare species that we need to protect. It's like the gumbo limbo, which is everywhere and used to be thought of as a cast iron plant.
Yes.
And now I'm losing them at my preserve. And
I'm
I don't
sorry.
know why.
Yes, it's definitely a problem. Because of how our district is set up, our biggest example of that issue is the red bay wilt, the Persea. We're seeing that tree death. Now that again, that didn't used to be a rare plant, but it's becoming a source of attention because they figured out that Persea's avocado. Oh, this fungus is now going to kill our avocado industry. So now we're getting get some research dollars to work on it. In the meantime, we're losing our red bay. We're losing all these other trees. The whitefly is definitely an issue. I don't have a solution. They're working on it, I think. I think at this point for the whitefly, the general consensus is if you have some beloved trees, go ahead and invest in doing some root treatment. But there's no way we can do that across the board to match the problem that it actually is. Anything else?
Well, thank you very much. I want your shape files.